In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a bullion knot rose. So when you're creating this rose, I find it easiest to start with a circle on your fabric, and then that kind of gives you some guidelines so you know how big your rose is going to be. And then what I'm going to do is I've got my needle and thread here. I'm using 6 strands right now, but you can use as many as you want or whatever your pattern calls for. But I'll be using 6. So I'm going to bring my needle up right in the middle of this circle and pull all the way through, and the knot will stop the thread on the back side. And I'm actually going to start with a French knot in the middle. So if you don't know how to do a French knot, I have a tutorial on that as well. I'll do one here really quickly and show you. I'm going to wrap the thread around my needle 3 times and then insert it back down into the fabric right where it came up. And I'm going to kind of pull this tail tight while I pull the thread through. And that makes a French knot. You can see here how the rose kind of works all around the center point. So that's what we just created. We created our center point, and then we're just going to create bullion knots surrounding it. So here goes our first bullion knot. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our needle up anywhere next to that French knot we did, and we're going to pull it through. And at the beginning, they're going to be smaller, and then they'll get bigger and bigger as our circle gets bigger. So right now we're just working around this inside point. So I'm just going to go here to the other side of my French knot, and I'm going to insert the needle through the fabric, but I'm not going to pull a needle all the way through. Instead, I'm going to feel for my needle and bring it back up right where my tail of thread is over here. So I'm going to push my needle through and then stop it right about there. Then I'm going to take this tail over here, and I'm going to wrap it around my needle. Well, you want to wrap it around the needle so that the thread on this part of your needle is as big as this section here. So I'll show you. I'll probably do it 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you scrunch that down, you can kind of measure and see if that row of thread is about the same as that bit of fabric. And it is. So 4 times was correct in this case. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of hold this in place with my finger while I pull the needle through, because I don't want this to come undone or lose how it's wrapped around the needle. So I'm going to use my thumb to kind of hold that down while I pull the needle through. Okay, so I'm just pulling, and now I'm going to lift my needle up, or lift my finger up, and I can still see I kind of have that wrapped shape right there. And then I'm just going to make sure everything's going on this side of the French knot. I'm going to use these fingers to start squishing it down. Now at this point, I'm going to flip the thread over to this side because this is the direction I want it to lay. And I'm just going to pull on this tail and kind of scrunch it down again. Scrunch those wrapped threads around that I wrapped around in. And they should all fit snug inside that little section because I measured it out, and that was about the right amount of thread that we did. So then I'm going to insert my needle into the fabric. You can insert it right where it was inserted before and pull it down. And there we've got our first little bullion knot. Now to make a rose, we're going to be overlapping. You can see on this one how I overlapped so that they kind of spiral out. This time I'm going to bring my needle up just to the outside of this first bullion knot. And I'm going to bring my needle up. And then I want to do about the same amount that I did there for this next stitch. So I'm going to bring it right here next to my French knot. Insert the needle in, and then remember, instead of taking your needle all the way through the fabric, you're going to try to bring it up right where this tail of thread is. Like that. So I'm not pulling it all the way through. And then I'm going to wrap this thread around my needle. And again, I'm going to gauge about how long does it need to be to get from this point to this point. And I would say probably like 5 times around the needle will work. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to scrunch all that down. And then I can decide if I need to do more or if that's good. I'm gonna do one more. Okay, so then I wanna keep this tight. I'm going to put my finger over this to hold it in place while I pull the needle through. Okay, so we're pulling it through until we get to about this point. Then I'll lift off my finger and I can start pulling this little section of thread around. And I'm going to pull on this tail and push these threads in, just like that. So once you have those stitches in place, then you can insert the needle back into the fabric, and this just secures the knot that we did. And then we will do it again. So this time we're going to come right up about here to overlap this one and work our way over here. So I'm going to bring my needle up right to the outside of that bullion knot and pull it through. And then I'm going to bring my needle to about here, and I'm going to bring it back up. I'm going to try to bring it up right where that other tail was. And I'm going to take this tail and wrap it around my needle, probably like 6 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Scrunch it all down. And that looks like it's going to be about the right width. So I'm going to hold that in place while I pull my needle through. Okay, and now I'm going to bring it over to this side. And then I'm going to keep pulling and scrunching until those are in the right place. And you kind of have to like play around with it, maneuver it a little until you have it how you want it. There we go. So that's about where I want it. And now I'm going to insert the needle back into the fabric and pull it all the way through. Okay, so we've got 3 bullion knots so far. 1, 2, 3. We'll do one more, and this time it's going to overlap this outer bullion knot. So they're starting to get a little bigger. So I'm going to bring my needle up so it's overlapping this one that I just did. And then it's going to go into my fabric right here, so it's going to start overlapping that one. And I'm going to try to bring it up right where this tail is. There we go. Okay, so it's getting bigger now. I'm going to need to wrap my thread so that it reaches from that point to this point. We want to cover all of this thread, all of this fabric that's between our 2 points of the needle. So I'm going to take my tail that's closest to the tip of my needle. I'm going to wrap it around. And I find that it's easier if you just like rotate your project as you're going. So I always like to have the end of my needle at the bottom, so I kind of turned it until I got to that point. So now I'm going to scrunch it down, and I can see if I'm going to need to do more or not. I could probably do one more. Okay, so scrunch it in. I'm going to hold that down with my thumb while I pull it through. And then I'm going to start scrunching and keep pulling until that goes all the way in. Just like that. And then I'll insert my needle. And once these bullion knots start getting bigger, you can start tacking them down by just doing a little stitch over the middle of it. So if I just bring my needle up right in the middle next to that bullion knot, and then I just do one stitch over the top of it. That kind of just helps hold it in its place so that it's not like wiggling around. Okay, so I'm going to bring my needle up. And I'm going to insert it. I'm going to come here to like the center of this bullion knot. So I'm bringing it back down. And then I'm going to bring it up right where the end of that tail is. And pull it so you have a little bit to work with. Okay, then I'll take this tail and wrap it around the needle as many times as I need so that it's a long enough knot. And remember, we're covering the fabric in between the 2 points of the needle, so I'll do one more. You can kind of check your measuring and then pin it down with your finger while you pull the needle through. And then we're going to start working it over here. Keep pulling and scrunching this end piece. You'll just keep scrunching in until it fits in that section of fabric that we're working with. And then you can insert it back into the fabric. And then since it's getting a little longer, we're going to tack it down. So I'm just bringing my needle up right next to that bullion knot. And then I'll insert it back down into the fabric. And then at this point, I could switch thread colors if I wanted to do like a lighter color thread, because a lot of times the center of a rose is darker than the outside of the rose, or you can just keep going with the same color. Totally up to you. So I switched out my thread color and I just picked back up right in the middle of that previous bullion knot, and at this point it's starting to get easier to see the pattern. We're basically just like doing a little loop around each one, and we're slowly overlapping like a cinnamon roll. So I'm gonna bring my needle back down and bring it up right where that tail is. I'm gonna wrap my thread around the needle, and as you go, the knots will need to get bigger and bigger because the circle's getting longer and longer. So now I need to reach from, you can see where my needle's poking out and going in. That's how big my next knot needs to be. Okay, so I did like 8 or 9 times. So I'm gonna hold that down with my thumb while I pull this through. And then I'm gonna start working it over here. And then I'm going to insert the needle back into the fabric. And I'm going to do a little tack stitch. So I'm going to bring my needle up right next to that knot. And then just stitch over it once to hold it in its place. Just did that last bullion knot. So now I'm pulling it through the fabric. And I have my bullion rose. So you can see how we started here in the center with that French knot, and then we just started like doing a cinnamon roll around the French knot to create our bullion knot rose. And then to tie it off on the back, you can just slide your needle underneath one of the stitches that's close by. Pull your needle through and then stick it through this loop. And pull it tight, and just do that twice. And that will secure it. So there you have a bullion knot rose. And then you can add some leaves if you want. You can play around with the different colors you use to kind of create some dimension.